having opened their restaurant in the Adelphi in the early 1860s, Stefano and Agostino decided in the 1870s to branch out into music, and they had a series of prom concerts, the first prom concerts, in Leicester Square. These concerts brought in a hell of a lot of money and enabled them to achieve their dream of buying a theatre. And this they did in 1879 when they bought the Adelphi. Well, the Adelphi was nice and it was a good theatre, and it had a very, very good restaurant next to it, which they named the Marble Halls because of its splendour. But it lacked one thing: it didn't have electricity. So they applied to Westminster Council for permission to have electricity. But Westminster Council said no. So the Gatti said, well, perhaps there's a problem with the money. If we paid for the electricity to be installed, would that do? And Westminster said no. So they decided that they would do it themselves. And after closing time, they got their waiters to dig up the Strand and install electricity cables which reached to the Adelphi. So the Adelphi had electricity. But that wasn't the end of the story, because in order for the Adelphi to have electricity, they needed some power, and therefore they needed a power station. And the power station made a lot of noise, which didn't please the owner of the vaudeville a few doors away, who actually didn't like competition from the Adelphi anyway. And he said, this is impossible, you've got to close down the power station, and while you're at it, you should close down the Adelphi. Well, this was unacceptable to the Gattis, and they did the only thing which they possibly could do under those circumstances, and they acquired the vaudeville as well. And the vaudeville soon had electricity, and people began saying, well, if you've got electricity, well, how about us? So by 1900, the Gatti Electricity Company, as it had become, was supplying most of the West End with electricity. And it was thanks to that that the Gatti family became stakeholders in the future of London, in order to safeguard their theatres, their restaurants, and above all their electricity company. They had to play a part in public affairs, and they did. And Agostino's son Giovanni, who had been born in Donjo, changed personality and became Sir John Gatti, and the only sign of his of his origins was the fact that to his dying day he continued to smoke cigars from Brissago. But he became Lord Mayor of Westminster in 1912 to 13, which actually didn't mean much. Much more important was that in the 1920s he became Treasurer of the London County Council, and then Chairman of the London County Council. And if you want to understand what that meant, it was the equivalent to the position held by Boris Johnson and today by Sadiq Khan. And as such, he was responsible for the welfare of a population that was larger than the whole of Switzerland.